right. This chair? Yep. All right.
That was great. You were so inspiring.
What was that pen yesterday?
The last person to read my book and to edit my book was my wife, because I'm not stupid. Okay? Always run things past your spouse. Okay? They're your spouse for a reason. And if it's money, that's a good reason too. But Marie's read my book, and she made some critical changes to it, and she was the one who recommended that I ask Martin Sheen. And that made a material change to the entire dynamic of the book. I have written a lot of stuff. Sometimes my systems are wrong, right? I just have the right amount of coffee in me. And when Martin Sheen's foreword came back, it was materially similar, but not the same of what I wrote. And it's just set the pace for the entire book. You are going to love this book, but reading that first foreword, which I'm going to give you a taste of tonight, is going to change your life. And the best part is, it's bookended with an epilogue. And I don't know if you guys know, but when I'm talking on television or WAMC, are you aware that I really don't give a lot of thought to what I'm saying? A guy actually said this to me in Philadelphia. He said, I'm a TV production officer. I sit with 10 monitors on all day, and I can tell when you're talking, because this is what it sounds like, blah, 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 blah. And everyone has already got all of their opinions set, and they repeat them over and over again. And he goes, I can see you think while you're talking, and you don't speak like a pundit. And I go, he says, what are you doing? And I go, talking? And he goes, so you don't give a lot of thought to what you're saying. I go, I'm giving you my opinion or my analysis. And if I can't calculate that based on what I already know, then you're not getting me. You're getting what a lot of pundits do, which is they discuss with their friends, they work it up into an op-ed, they go on TV and they repeat that same thing over and over. And I can actually change my opinion based on the information that I'm getting in from time to time. So if it looks like right now, the only difference between the way I'm talking now is I wear a tie and I sit straight, because I have to. But there's no difference between the way I really talk on television when I'm let loose, and WAMC just gives me a lot more time. And what I'm doing here tonight is I'm giving you a much more expanded version of that. This is tonight a deep dive into that. So I've got about, 30 minutes more of speaking about the book, because I don't want to ruin the book for you. Yesterday, I gave a speech to the Hudson Public Library about my last book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy. And good. Let me tell you something. You're going to buy Plot to Betray America tonight. I'm going to go over it, but you really need to go buy Plot to Destroy Democracy. And that's not because I want to sell books. I already met the New York Times bestsellers list with that. I couldn't knock some guy. I'm number 6 in the middle of summer in the light reading section. I couldn't knock some guy named Neil deGrasse Tyson off from number 5. And the number 1 book was David Sedaris, book of jokes in the middle of July. But I did knock some lady named Zora Neale Hurston off the bestsellers. I felt so bad. There's a poet up there. I felt bad knocking her off the bestsellers list, but I held on to it for 10 weeks. Before I went on Bill Maher with that book, I took time to read it. And there's a big difference between writing a book and reading a book. I read that book, and I scared myself. I couldn't believe how I had synthesized all these things. That book is about Russia and how they organized the attack on the United States and how they used all these very old KGB techniques. But more importantly, how they were organizing the alt-right, the right wing, around Europe And the United States was their last conquest. And then I get into the evangelicals, how they spent 14 years flipping the evangelicals to believing Vladimir Putin was the savior of Christianity. It's not a joke. They call Russia the last great bastion of white Christianity. And then how Steve Bannon, who follows a philosopher of Vladimir Putin, created the alt-right from computer games. He created the whole paid industry of gaming and paying for little extra points on shared computer games. That's where he got his hundreds of millions of dollars from. And then I go into the National Rifle Association, where I had identified Maria Butina a year in advance as a Russian intelligence officer or an intelligence subcontractor whose job it was to flip the NRA, right? As a matter of fact, when they were having that big debate about her, saying, well, Maria Butina has been arrested and she might be a honey trap, I had a section of the book called Maria Butina, Honey Trap. It was just ridiculous. The press is pretty far behind. By the way, in case you guys are wondering, I'm not a journalist. Do you know that? I'm a spy. I don't have to do all the things that journalists do. What you are getting on television and in my books, the reason that I wrote my first book, Plot to Hack America, 8 weeks before the election, and why it was identical to the CIA's report, is because I see things very, very differently than journalists. I had 30 years of secret intelligence operations under my belt, and when I see one, I can identify it. Journalists have to go interview 300 people and get 2 sources for every point to see the same thing that I'll see in 5 minutes. That is why my books are fundamentally different and fundamentally faster. Plot to Hack America came out on September 23rd, 2016. The next book to come out was Luke Harding's book, Collusion. It came out 13 months later. The first American book to come out after that was David Korn and Michael Isakov's. Did anybody read that book, Russian Roulette? Came out 23 months later. As a matter of fact, there was a review on Amazon. I shouldn't say this because I like David, we're friends. And it said, a long, slow version of Plot to Hack America. It's a good book, though. It's a little slow. 23 months. So that is really fundamentally the difference between what I write and what other journalists write. And Plot to Destroy Democracy is all about Russia. All about Russia until you get to that last couple of chapters about the alt-right, the NRA, and how Russia created Donald Trump's worldview. And we are living in that worldview. And the Plot to Betray America is the next phase of that story. It's the last of the plot books. It is about all of the Americans that were involved in this and how it's very easy to see the reason our national security is being compromised today is because there is a pool of money in this world that supersedes loyalty to flags, to people, to anything other than money. Okay, I always ask this question. I think I asked this on WAMC, so if you know the answer, don't shout it out, right? Has anybody heard of a small Spanish port called Puerto Banús, Spain? Where is it? Yeah, good one. Do you remember what town it's next to? Marbella, right? Marbella. Okay, you guys heard my radio program. If you've been to Puerto Banús, then you get around. Right? You've been to Puerto Banús? Do you own a mega yacht? The port there is only for mega yachts with helicopter pads, not regular mega yachts, real 20, 50, $100 million mega yachts. It is one of the most exclusive ports in the world, okay? And I entered Puerto Banús because I was living in Spain at the time and I was doing intelligence operations and I was going out to sea and I was going to various places, and every once in a while the ship or platform that I was on would let me off. I got dropped off in Puerto Banús, and when I was there, I got to this small cafe that's there, and I always bought a copy of the International Herald Tribune, and I would sit down and I would read, and this guy comes up to me, and he says, are you finished with your newspaper? And I said, yeah, here, go ahead, take it. And he said, are you a crew? And I was like, I looked at him, he's in shorts, he's in Docksiders, but he's got a nice shirt on. He's got a Brooks Brothers shirt on. I go, this is an owner. And I go, yeah, you could say that. And he goes, what are you crewing on? And I said, oh, it's not here. It already came and left, right? And I said, what are you on? He goes, oh, I got that one over there. I said, that's Eagle 5. And he goes, oh, yeah, you know my boat? And he goes, it stays in Portsmouth. And then what we do is we bring it down here, and then we all fly here for parties. And then they all go home by airplane, and then the ship goes back to England from southern Spain. And he said, oh, so you know Eagle 5? And I go, yeah. I said, you have a problem with your right-hand propeller, with your starboard propeller. It's sort of luffing. He goes, yeah, we're doing repairs on it. He goes, do you know some of my crew? I said, no. He goes, well, what do you ride? I said, I rode the USS Cincinnati, a Los Angeles-class atomic attack submarine. I got off this port, and you came into the port last night at 6:30, and we were right behind you. It's just you didn't see me, because we don't surface. We just come up a little bit, and the top comes up, and I pull up next to a tugboat, I jump onto it, and it goes back down, it disappears. Suddenly I'm interesting. Right? And he sits down, he's like, let me buy you a coffee. So, Puerto Banús is the home of one of the global homes of what I call the global oligarchy, or the globogarchy. These are people who literally own bakeries in France, will use an executive jet every morning to fly warm French baguettes from Marseille or Toulon or Lyon to their house in Moscow so that they could say they have warm French bread in the morning. That's not a joke. Donald Trump, when he went to the Miss Universe pageant in 2014, had a private 2-hour meeting with the top 12 richest oligarchs of Russia, including Vladimir Putin's personal representative. Vladimir Putin, it is estimated, may be worth as much as 200 billion very illicit dollars, right? He's sort of like the Arab sheikhs. They're trillionaires. They just don't say it, but they own every drop of oil in that country, and they take like a fake salary of like $1 billion to cover it. There is a body of people and money above this nation's flag, above this nation's constitution, above all of you, and they do not care about you or me. What they care about is money. More money than you can shake a stick at, all right? Now, I've been around some money in my life. I was part of the Iraq Economic Development Program, where I had to secure $3 billion that were being offloaded into platforms into a terminal. I have a picture of me sitting on a 40-foot-high stack of money. That's interest to these guys in about an hour. All right? There is a pool of money out there. And when I wrote my second book, Plot to Destroy Democracy, one of the questions that just kept popping into my head was, how does Jeff Sessions, a United States senator, just give up everything for Donald Trump? And then has secret meetings with the Russians and never says a word to the FBI investigators. What would motivate him to do that? A lot of money. A lot of money that's going to make him insanely rich after they leave the White House. All right? In the Christopher Steele memorandum, in the report, it said, if ExxonMobil's deal with Russia went ahead, there would be a 12% commission that totaled $19 billion. No, Rex Tillerson was Secretary of State. And that's who was supposed to execute that, and that's why he was appointed Secretary of State. The point is, these deals that are out there, the money that's out there is far higher than you can think. And Donald Trump wants to be an oligarch. Now, how do you get to be an oligarch? Well, in Russia, the only way that you get to be an oligarch is if Vladimir Putin allows you to be an oligarch. So that's why the second chapter of my book is called A Supervillain with a Leash. Because that's Vladimir Putin. And I talk about his old days when he was a baby spy. Does anybody have can somebody bring me a copy of the book? I don't carry them around with me. I'll read something for you. And the third chapter is about Donald Trump. And the third chapter is called, hold on. So, third chapter is called A Man That Needs to Be Walked, A Dog That Needs to Be Walked. Remember for me to get that back to you. So what I want to do is I want to read you a little bit out of this book because there's two sections that I think are very important that I write about. And I bookend this story with some of the things that people over the last couple of years that I love have called me, well, not people that I love, but I love that they're calling me. People have called me a conspiracy theorist. Right up until the Mueller report was released. Then they called me a conspiracy theorist because the Mueller report's not good. You know, or so they say. Oh, I got a copy. Thanks. So, some of the things that we've heard is that there was no Russian scandal. As a matter of fact, the White House right now is working furiously to get Russia off the hook. They're fighting right now to say the DNC, the Democratic National Committee servers, were not hacked by Russian military intelligence or Russian national intelligence, the FSB. Nope, it was actually hacked by the pro-Western, pro-NATO government of the Ukraine. And that they're just framing poor Russia with their ex-KGB president, right? I mean, Vladimir Putin is a KGB officer. He was a career KGB officer until he woke up and found that his nation had collapsed. He was a lifelong communist. The first touch he had with the KGB was when he was 13. He went to a KGB open house. They told him, come back when you finish university, go to law school, then come join the KGB. He went to university, he went to law school, he joined the KGB. As part of the research of this book, I went to his office in Dresden, Germany, and sat down in the glow of a baby spy. And here's how it is with a baby spy, right? Like all of us. It's like if you've got a job at Stewart's. Your job's to make the coffee, sweep the floor, do all the work, right? Well, he was in the office full of very senior people. So when they needed somebody to go out and flip a West German who was coming over to see his East German girlfriend, they sent the baby spy, right? And they sent him for all of the recruiting jobs because they could sit around and drink beer while he went out and did the work. But you know, when you are an intern or it's your first job, you really learn that job, don't you? Because you're doing all the work. Vladimir Putin's job was to learn how to manipulate people into being traitors. That was his fundamental first job. Now, then he becomes president of Russia. And he sits at his desk, and somebody says, hey, do you know this idiot? And he goes, which idiot? There are just so many. If I sound like Boris Badenov, because they all sound like Boris Badenov. And he goes, Donald Trump. He is talking about the running for president. And he goes, Donald Trump, who's on The Apprentice, the #1 show in Russia? Not joking. It was a top show in Russia. They loved his autocratic style of you're fired. Russian oligarchs flocked around him. And they just loved this guy. And that's how he got Miss Universe to come to Russia. because they all wanted to see Donald Trump. Now, I'm a guy that started as a baby spy, right? I'm president of Russia. I'm looking at this guy. He's a millionaire. People say, hey, this guy has political aspirations. What's the first thing I do? I said, go get me the Donald Trump file from the FSB headquarters, because we are not the KGB anymore. By the way, I got into a really great fight with Glenn Greenwald, who said, this guy on MSNBC is such an idiot. He thinks the KGB still exists. It ceased to exist 25 years ago. Look, if I take the letters CIA and I remove the letters C and I, and I put the letters B and C so that it becomes the ABC, I'm not 6 months old. It doesn't cease to exist. The building is still there. The files are still there. That's what happened in the transition from the KGB to the FSB. It didn't cease to exist. They just changed. This actually happened. A guy came up with a screwdriver, took down K and B, and put up F and S, and boom. They changed organizations. The KGB, Russia Today, by the way, attacked me over that. And they said, MSNBC Russia expert says the KGB is Vladimir Putin was director of the KGB. So I got great pleasure at tweeting at them, right, that, hey, KGB equals FSB, right? And that hashtag took off, and I got 50,000 likes, which is about 3 million people looking at that thing. So their attack on me sort of backfired. The KGB has not ceased to exist. What's happening to the United States is that we are under attack by the same organization that is James Bond villain evil. It's just that, except like James Bond villains, Putin is now a billionaire with yachts. You know, he's got those little mini submarines and women half naked all over the place. He is now literally a James Bond villain. And like all James Bond villains, they have stupid henchmen, and Donald Trump is one of them. Now, facts is facts, right? I gotta deal with facts as I see them. So before we go any further, I need to read some stuff for you. So, because this book is good. Every once in a while, I read my books and I go, did I write that? Start Google, every once in a while, I'll run it through a plagiarism checker. I've actually had to do that. Sometimes I go, wow. And my wife goes, you're just a good writer. And I go, no, I'm not. I just think you're a good editor. So, let me see. Let me read. I want to read you a little bit from the start, because I love Section 1, Organizing to Steal an Election. Betraying the oath in plain sight. Oh, by the way, what's the paper in Albany? Times Tribune, yeah. They said, one of these right-wing editors up there said, Malcolm Nance is a conspiracy theorist. And he wrote in his last book on November 6, 2016, Vladimir Putin became the first Russian president of the United States. And I thought, yeah? You got a problem with that? 2 years later on, I'm still right. So, I'm going to read the first part. On July 27, 2016, when Donald J. Trump, the Republican nominee for President of the United States, approached the podium to deliver a barn burner speech against his Democratic Party opponent, Hillary Rodham Clinton, he knew he was about to betray his nation. Everything America had ever stood for was about to be burned to the ground. When he did this, he had but one goal: to win. To achieve his victory, he was going to do something no other American in history had done or had dared. He would publicly and brashly demand that a hostile foreign power intercede on his behalf in the 2016 election for President of the United States. Trump's request was simple. He would ask the Russian intelligence agencies to steal the emails of his opponent and release them publicly to the global news media so he could win the election. It would be a crowning achievement of political performance art that would likely never again be rivaled in American history. It was a singular political move no one had ever dared to do previously. Before Trump bullied and insulted his way to the top of the ticket, an outrageous spectacle like this was unthinkable, unprecedented. This was just the way Trump liked it. He was going to make history. With all of this in mind, Trump stepped forward to the microphone, and in an instant, he let the mask slip off, exposing 4 years' worth of winks, nods, and signed contracts with Putin's Kremlin, and said the words that for any other person would have been tantamount to treason. Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think that you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press. Voila, it was done. Donald J. Trump, champion of the Republican Party, stood before the world and publicly embraced America's most insidious near-peer enemy. But what did Trump care? He had a race to win, and if it meant using the global media's fiery obsession and insatiable appetite for any news related to Hillary Clinton's email, so be it. Perhaps his public confession, where he practically admitted that he was in league with a foreign nation, relieved a secret internal pressure, a pressure that incessantly weighed heavily within him, but which motivated him to achieve a perpetually pressing secret desire: I must be a winner. So that's the first part. Oh, it gets better. That's just paragraph 1. So some of you may have heard that I had equated Donald Trump to Benedict Arnold. As a matter of fact, that's why I wanted to know that newspaper. The Times-Union said that I had called Donald Trump the worst traitor since Benedict Arnold, and I had not. What I said on television was, if all of this is true, then he will be the worst traitor since Benedict Arnold. I owe Benedict Arnold an apology. So, Benedict Arnold fought for this nation. I mean, he was a real war fighter. It was only when he felt slighted and then married a woman who really, really, really wanted to be in the high society of England, Peggy Shippen, that he betrayed the nation. And in fact, he was so gallant, he wrote to George Washington from the British ship that he escaped on to tell Washington, I did this on my own. Yes, I screwed you over, but my chief of staff and my chief, my head of command, none of them were complicit in this plot. It was just me. That's a little bit of gallantry. Donald Trump will never, ever, ever achieve a level of half-decent notoriety that Benedict Arnold will have. Benedict Arnold fought the Battle of Saratoga, and if none of you know the Battle of Saratoga, it was not going well. The Americans were being pressed, and he saw, after he had been relieved of his command for being sort of a hothead, he saw that there was an opening on the British right flank. And without orders, he jumped on a horse, went back to his troops, took them, turned the British right flank, and helped a crucial move that beat the British at Saratoga. That is why on the statue of Saratoga, there is a statue bas-relief of his boot. And why was it his boot? Because he was shot through the thigh. And that gave him a critical injury that took him off the battlefield and led him to treachery. But his boot is what was dedicated, his wound is honored there as all that is honorable about Benedict Arnold. I've been to Benedict Arnold's crypt. In case any of you were wondering, he is buried in a church in the southwest side of London, in a small village, a small section called Battersea, in a church there, and he is buried in an underground crypt that has been converted into a kindergarten. That's where Benedict Arnold is. And he and Peggy Shippen have a lovely view of a fish tank. I'm not joking. You can go to Battersea Church and see what happens when you betray the country. So, Donald Trump is clearly, without any question, the worst person to have ever been in the position of President of the United States. And there's a reason for that, and that's going to lead me to my next reading. So one of the things that I do in this book is I discuss the one flaw that he has. The man has no character. He has no, what we call depth of soul. He has no capacity for shame, no capacity for humbleness. You know, my beloved wife, all the time, she would say, you know, you're pretty good at this. And I'd say, well, I'm not that great at it. And she'd go, what's up with the humble routine? And I go, well, you know, in the military, when you start putting your head up, you get shot, right? So I've learned to be a little humble. And she's just like, well, knock it off. But Donald Trump, the word humility has never entered his lexicon. He is the worst character of any person to ever sit in the White House. I will not refer to him as the President of the United States. Oh, well, Malcolm, and I get right-wingers ask me this all the time. Isn't that disrespectful of the Commander-in-Chief? And I go, well, when we get a Commander-in-Chief, I'll let you know. Because one of the parts of this book which I really loved was when I wrote chapter 17, Fixing a Fractured Democracy, where I write about character and the traits that we all expect as American citizens in the first citizen of this nation. Every president of the United States, including Richard Nixon, had the character to be president of the United States. Andrew Jackson was an uneducated, racist, genocidal ignoramus. But in his 4 years, he still maintained the dignity of the office of the President of the United States. Yes, he was mass murdering Indians. That's a flaw that we'll all have to live with. But did he shame the office? It's hard to argue it. He was a commensurate politician. So I want to give you a little bit of reading about character, because this section of the book means something to me. I spent my entire life dedicating every minute to ensuring all of you can come here and have drinks without worrying about somebody blowing the place up, right? Don't thank me, thank my wife and my mom, right? I did the fun stuff. I was riding submarines into Puerto Banús, right? My poor sainted mother having to worry about us. So I'm going to read this really quickly. As chief executive, the president is more than the most powerful man in the world. He is caretaker of the largest and most devoted republic. The electoral process is supposed to be a selection and vetting process to choose the first citizen who is sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution. For 243 years, American elections have also been a character test. A test of a candidate's inherent decency just as much as his or her fortitude, wherein the best of all the citizens are freely selected to be the leader of 340 millions. There are many ways to test the character of a man or a woman who would become the President of the United States. The characteristics that would best describe the national leader should include compassion, empathy, decisiveness, intellect, and an unwavering desire to defend the principles and rules of the Constitution above all. It is the belief that the first citizen should not only reflect the best aspects of the national character and embody someone who the citizenry can admire and emulate, but also that he or she, above all things, should understand the American experiment from its founding. The president, as the first citizen, should seek to maintain, defend, and further the success of that experiment. A certain level of gallantry has always been expected of the president. By gallantry, I mean gentlemanly in form and attitude. Yes, some taking the seat have proven themselves craven and crude, but the head of the first families has usually been led by a person with a sense of calmness, strength, and refinement. For 243 years, the person occupying the office of the presidency has generally behaved in such a way that it was clear from the time that a democratically elected person held office that he feared to let the country down. Even those perennially listed among the worst, like Millard Fillmore, Andrew Johnson, and especially Richard Nixon, worked to advance the nation. The defense of the Constitution was above all else the principal mission of the man behind the resolute desk. And until 2016, this held strong and firm across American history. One second, I gotta skip a little because I go into all the presidents. Since we are expounding on leadership, it should be noted that the men and women of the armed forces use a centuries-old method for producing leaders of substance of their own. Their honor is reflected in their mottos. The motto of the U.S. Navy is courage, honor, commitment. The motto of the U.S. Army is duty, honor, country. The motto of the U.S. Air Force Academy is integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. The Marine Corps values are reflected in the Latin phrase semper fidelis, which means always faithful. And the U.S. Coast Guard has its ever-proven phrase, semper paratus, which means always ready. These are deeply held principles for which tens of thousands of men and women have sacrificed their lives to keep our flag unsullied and to advance the cause of freedom and democracy. Most important trait of all is that they be men and women of character. When we say character, we mean that they must not only have love of country, but of personal integrity. I can't get past that. They must maintain a code of honor and be ready and willing to fight and die to uphold these principles. Every president is also commander-in-chief and should live by the same honor code as the armed forces. Many presidents had the experience of serving in war, including George Washington, Ulysses S. Grant, Theodore Roosevelt, William McKinley, James Garfield, Rutherford B. Hayes, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, John F. Kennedy, and George H.W. Bush are among the 29 presidents who served in the armed forces. In researching this book, I came across a discussion by David Blanchard Palmer. At the end of the discussion about George Washington's travails in dealing with the treachery of Benedict Arnold, he evoked the name of Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the hero of one of the most decisive battles in Gettysburg. Chamberlain distinguished himself in his small regiment, the 20th Maine, by standing firm in an untenable position at a critical place and juncture, which could have led to the complete collapse of the Union lines in the battle. Had Chamberlain failed, the Civil War could have ended quickly and badly. America as we know it could have been sent asunder into two competing nations that would likely have gone on to other wars. I'm going to quickly skip over that. When pressed by Southern forces attacking uphill at a place called Little Round Top, Chamberlain's men were barely holding the Union right flank. Chamberlain was in a desperate situation. His men were almost out of ammunition. Except for a small group protecting the flag, he was losing cohesion of his forces on the left and the right, and at his center, men were falling under withering Confederate gunfire. At that moment, the enemy was about to storm up the hill and sweep them away. Chamberlain saw one chance to save it all. Chamberlain ordered, with the entire army in peril, Chamberlain ordered his last companies to organize into lines, to fix their bayonets, and without ammunition, they would storm down on the gathering Southerners with only the slightest hope that the surge of steel and charging men would break the Southern assault. He did so, and so it did. In that one instant, America was saved by one act of bravery. A self-effacing man, Chamberlain attributed one trait that made up the measure of his men who could take such a brave and risky attack in the face of the tsunami of death: character. In his own words, he expounded, "The lesson impressed on me as I stand here and my heart and my mind traverse your faces in the years that are gone is in a great momentous struggle like this commemorated here, is character that tells. I do not mean simply or chiefly bravery. Many a man has that, who may become surprised or disconcerted at a sudden change in the posture of affairs. What I mean by character is a firm and seasoned substance of the soul. I mean such qualities or acquirements as intelligence, thoughtfulness, conscientiousness, right-mindedness, patience, fortitude, long-suffering, and unconquerable resolve. Now you've seen the evidence that I have laid out on America. In the era of Donald Trump, what say you now?" You're all crying. I can tell you're like, Malcolm, you are harshing my mellow. So for my last point, before I start taking questions, and I'll take a few questions, and then we'll sign some books, I'm going to give you something uplifting. I'm going to read you part of the foreword by Martin Sheen. It will bring tears to your eyes, and you will say, I want that president from the West Wing. I'm going to read this to you, and it's wonderful. America is the greatest power the world has ever seen simply because it harnesses the strengths of all those who seek her bounty. A nation where the transgressions... I'm going to stand up. I got to stand up for this because he's good. That a nation where transgressions of the parents could always be atoned for by the children who stood firm to refine the American promise. America has been a place where goodness, compassion, and kindness were the noblest of goals, where character, erudition, and empathy were the hallmarks of our national leaders. It held these values dear until the inner hatred of some rejected the simple act of electing a black man as our first citizen. His mistake was to try to bind the nation by giving the poorest health care, the gift of life, and with it a greater opportunity for liberty. On November 9th, 2016, and on every day since the election of Donald J. Trump, a narcissistic scoundrel of a con man, turned opportunistic politician, this once great nation has been on a breakless descent into a seemingly unending hellscape of national despair. 60% of our countrymen and women, especially those of color, Native Americans, and the poor, are ignored by a scallywag whose only love is for himself and his billionaire friends. It is heartrending that Trump has convinced a cavalcade of sunshine patriots and the misguided desperate to believe that they could be masters above all others if they just embrace hatred and violence and make him their petty tyrant. Oh, I'm going to cry here in a minute. Malcolm Nance reveals in these pages how Trump violated the oath of office after having been elected with the assistance of our foreign enemies and a disgraceful alliance of neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and congressional toadies who may be best called fifth columnists. All of those so-called citizens allowed Trump free rein to transform America from a constitutional republic to a constitutional autocracy, with our beloved national contract a mere fig leaf. Nance outlines the long, disgraceful journey into a wretched, putrid bilge of Trump's nascent authoritarianism. It lays bare the plan to enrich himself at the expense of America's national security and his mad desire to mimic the iron-fisted rule of his peers, a ruthless dictator, a North Korean mass murderer, and an assortment of communist autocrats. I hope I inspired a few of you in my role as Josiah Bartlett, the fictional TV president in the TV series West Wing, when he said, "We did not expect, nor did we invite a confrontation with evil, yet the true measure of a people's strength is how they rise to master that moment when it does arrive. But every time we think we have measured our capacity to meet a challenge, we look up and we are reminded that that capacity may well be limitless. This is a time for American heroes. We will do what is hard. We will achieve what is great. This is a time for American heroes, and we reach for the stars. I am sure that, informed reader, you will realize that you are the heroes we have been waiting for. With your enlightened passion, America will survive." Martin Sheen, August 2019. Yeah, I'm a guy cry. Whew. That guy is awesome. But that quote, he had to get Aaron Sorkin's permission to use it. It is there in the footnotes, the authorization. That's a small taste of that book. It's a mean book. It is full of nasty characters and critters. But each chapter starts off with a pretty funny story. And I hope that you'll enjoy that. But most importantly, the epilogue is bookmarks my version of what Martin Sheen just said there. And like I wrote in Plot to Destroy Democracy, I am a child of Philadelphia. I was born at a naval hospital. And the child from a military family that started in 1864. Every Nance male has served in the armed forces of the United States. Every war. My niece has taken up that mantle, and she was in combat off of Yemen a year ago in the Navy. So our legacy lives on. Now, why do I remind you of that? Because I love this country. All right? I am not joking. You know, I made a statement last year, and I am sorry I said it now. I was speaking at the Commonwealth Club, and I offhandedly said, I am willing to sacrifice my home, my treasure, and my family for this nation. And I sort of feel that I have. My wife is not going to see the end of this with us. Right? She's watching us, but it would have been better to watch the American experiment, which she was born into. She was raised in Montreal, but she was born in West Lafayette, Indiana. She's American, with a huge French accent. When she applied for a job in Washington, D.C., they insist she give them her green card. That's not a joke. They really wanted to see her green card, and she had to bring her birth certificate in. But, you know, she went back when she was 6 months old and returned at age 42. And I would so love for her to see this nation restored. When I was young in Philadelphia, I wrote this in the epilogue, A Plot to Destroy Democracy. When I would get mad, I'd like to go down to Independence Hall and sit because it's beautiful. I love history. I love the colonial era. And what I didn't know until one day I was angry, I went across the street and catty corner to Independence Hall on the back side is a park called Washington Square. And Washington Square, when I read the signs, was a graveyard of over 1,000 Revolutionary War unknown soldiers. And it is the site of the first unknown soldier in the United States. And there is a giant statue and marble granite wall with George Washington in an eternal flame. And what I didn't know was it was also the edge of town, supposedly, and that was a black graveyard, and they took it over from the slaves to bury the soldiers. And on that wall is a statement that I now believe set me off into the intelligence community. And it's a quote which Washington says, "Freedom is a light for which many men have died in darkness." We are in darkness. We have right now 1 year to save the American experiment. Not joking. We are in danger. No, we are teetering between whether we are a constitutional republic or a constitutional autocracy where the Constitution is a fig leaf, like I wrote, for essentially a totalitarian state. And where they will say, you have freedom of speech while stifling freedom of speech. You have, the only thing that I can't see these people doing that's from the Constitution is quartering British soldiers in our house, right? The Fourth Amendment. You cannot quarter soldiers in your house at your expense. That's still in the Fourth Amendment. But the right to search and seizure seems to be violated all the time. We are nearing a breaking point in American history. I think this will be the most significant election since 1860, when 14 states opted out of the election and then got mad when Abraham Lincoln was elected. Because that's the way right-wingers are. By the way, for those of you who are like, man, that guy just hate right-wingers. I was conservative most of my career. But I was a Colin Powell-style conservative. We are now called far-left liberals. And I've taken that little test. We're like, woo, way over here to the lower left. Because we believe in the values that we were given. It's no joke that we're African-American. We got nothing. People say they're immigrants. We were hostages. Right? We're not immigrants. We didn't ask to come here. That bag came off our head, and we were in South Carolina. We believe in what's happening here. I believe in you. I believe what Martin has said. You are the heroes we are waiting for. We are here collectively to express our values. And I take it personally when I'm run up against people who think 40% of this country should lead the other 60%, and that the other 60% don't get a say in anything. There are some crazy people in this immediate area, right? I got people out there talking to me about Claverack militia. Really? In one speech, I got the state police 50 caliber sniper rifles. You do not want to come up here and play like this is the Shays Rebellion. I love talking about that, by the way, because that's what these guys say. We're going to have us a rebellion. It's like, yeah, let me talk to you about the Shays Rebellion, which happened right over there near Pittsfield. Do you know how the Shays Rebellion was broken up? The National Guard was sent out there. And here's what George Washington, the president's orders were. Bring cannons. Because Washington knew, he goes, I'm not going to have this. And he shot the cannons at these rebels, at these tax dodgers. And he took off the head of the guy who was leading the rebellion, and the rebellion ended. That's what's going to happen. But we don't want to go anywhere near there. What we want to do is exercise the franchise to vote. We want all of you. Applaud for that. We're not led by a KGB officer yet. KGB lackey, but not a KGB officer. That is why this book is called The Plot to Betray America. The people who are here, they don't care really about the Constitution. It's very clear now, they only care about power. And to them, power means access to that pool of money that supersedes loyalty to the Constitution. I've spent every minute of my life defending this nation. I love this country dearly, and I have been all around the world. Look, I just came from a week in Paris, okay? And was happy to come home to Stottville. So with that, I want to thank you for listening to this presentation. I went long. Wow. I went 15 minutes over. I am good for 15 minutes over.